So we spent a good deal of time talking about this situation, and Steve, I knew that Raul Labrador might have a shot at some leadership capability in the U.S. House of Representatives, but Steve Millington, I think, pretty well confirmed it. The story that he was reading, likely coming down from the Associated Press, and it said that Labrador is one of the two finalists really to be the majority leader in the U.S. House of Representatives, and that means if he's not majority leader, that he's likely majority whip, which means he would be, that's for whipping votes. That means getting votes together and lining people up. If you've ever seen the TV show House of Cards, it might be a little exaggerated about how Washington works. It's entertaining for sure. But the idea of the whip is to go around and line up people sometimes who don't always want to vote with you on a particular bill, but if you can find some way to cajole them or tell them you can horse trade with them, they'll do it. And Labrador may end up with that role. Now, Jim Jordan of Ohio is a pretty stand-up guy when it comes to members of the House of Representatives. So it'll be interesting to see which way they tend to fall on this one, and maybe they don't want two Westerners in the leadership with McCarthy and Labrador maybe as 1 and 2. And again, it has to shake out over the next few days. But I thought that the story I read in the Hill about Labrador over the weekend gave some inkling that this might be in the move or in the cards. No pun intended with the show I was just mentioning. This is Raul Labrador appearing last night on the Fox News channel with Sean Hannity, and I'll play that for you in just a moment. I do want to mention we're up to 52. 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is about a minute in length.
We kept hearing, Sean, we just disagree with tactics. We agree on the same thing. But ultimately, wasn't the tactic, didn't it evolve into surrender? You say you're not going to shut down the government, you're not going to use your constitutional authority in the purse. Didn't it mean Obama wins every time?
Well, that's the problem that we have. They keep saying that we disagree on tactics, and we actually disagree on strategy, and we disagree on the bottom line. Our leadership right now has been trying to fund Obamacare. They want to fund Planned Parenthood. They want to, at the end of this year, their goal was actually to undo the caps. They have a totally different strategy than we have here as conservatives. And what they have done is they make certain promises as candidates. And they go to the American people and they say, if you give me the House and the Senate, these are the things that we're willing to do for you. They're giving false hope to the American people. And then when we, as members of Congress, say, hey, we want to do those things that we promised the American people that we were going to do, then they get mad at us and they call us false prophets. I think that's really the fundamental problem that we have here.
I was thinking during the 9 o'clock news about this whole situation, and it struck me, Mike Simpson may actually work to get Labrador elected to that leadership role. And I'll tell you why. Because when I first came here, there were people who were telling me that the only reason the governor ran for re-election the last time out was they wanted to block Labrador from seeking the seat. And there's been a rumor going around that the governor won't finish this term and that he'll turn over his job to Brad Little. And then Little will be the incumbent and likely not be facing anyone in a primary, such as Raul Labrador. Or that Raul Labrador would be running for U.S. Senate if one of the two seats happened to come open. So, if you want to divert him and you make him the majority leader of the House of Representatives, which is a huge political role, likely will eclipse anything that he could have here in Idaho. He might be able to come back here down the road in another 10 years, reasonably young guy, and pursue Senate or pursue the governor's office. But from all points, I think you could look at that and say, being the second most powerful person in the House of Representatives, or even the third, is so. If Mike Simpson has been a rival of his and Simpson is part of the old boy network, then they may all be saying, yeah, let's make sure Raul is happy in this new job. And they may be actually working to promote that as well with some of their political allies. In other words, just to get him out of the way for the time being. 11 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our telephone number, if you'd like to reach the program, is 736-0300, 736-0300. It could also, though, change, and I think this could be for, at least if you're a conservative in the Magic Valley and really in this district, it could change Mike Simpson's approach to how he votes on many issues. Because if John Boehner isn't there, and suddenly the leadership is comprised of one of his a member of his congressional delegation, it may give him a little bit more liberty to actually vote with conservatives than he's had in the past. So I'm trying to tell you, we can't always say the glass is half empty. It might be half full here. We could see him come a long way in meeting a lot of people in the Tea Party movement and conservatives who've battled with him over the years because of his particular stand being a member of the Republican establishment. 53-912, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And we have a caller. You're next. You're on the air.
Right now?
Yes, good morning.
Hi. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Peggy. I haven't really seen a lot of Raul Labrador, and I was wondering why is the governor and them trying to keep him out of Idaho? Has he got a whole different play on the way he wants things run?
I think
Could you
in
elaborate on that?
Sure. And do you want to hang on the line, or will you listen off air?
I'll listen off air. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Super. Thank you for the telephone call. I think that might be a first-time caller or a rare caller. Raul Labrador does not play by the rules when it comes to, well, the insiders in the Republican Party. And I'm not knocking them, but there's a particular decorum and a way that a party operates, particularly at a state level. And you've got a group of people who are very powerful, who sit at the top, and they make decisions about who they would like to see run for a particular office, or they would like to see this person toe the line on a few issues, or maybe be a bit more deferential on some issues. And the Republican Party is not the conservative party. Let's be honest about that. That's why it's not called the Conservative Party. You've got a conservative party in a lot of countries, Canada and England and the like. But conservatives have had an uneasy alliance with a lot of the old-time Republicans. And Labrador comes along in 2010. And really without the blessing of these people, young guy, having served in the state legislature, and he essentially kicks the table legs out from under their table. So they were not happy with him. Now, 5 years later, they may have been able to bury the hatchet at some point. In fact, the governor's office was telling me that the relationship has been very, very good between the governor and Raul Labrador over the last year or so. So it may well be, once they realized he was going to be here for a while, and he's incredibly popular in his district, almost rock star type of popularity. This guy goes to town hall meetings, and people show up in droves. And they feel that, and some people have criticized him and said, well, he backed down from an effort to take out Boehner earlier. There's an old line a friend of mine used to say when we would be talking at work about issues, and I'd say, we've got to go to the boss and we've got to complain about this. And he'd say to me, this is not the hill that I want to die on. In other words, you pick your battles. When Hitler was had his troops at Stalingrad, he could have pulled back and regrouped and perhaps saved his army. But he wouldn't do it. Sometimes you do have to pull back and regroup and look for another entry point. And so that's in politics, that's an analogy to politics, how it works. So I'm not disturbed by the fact that he backed away from removing Boehner at an earlier point. He may have looked around and said, you know what, we're all going to be out on a limb here. They're going to punish us. We're going to pay for it. We won't have a say. Our constituents won't have a say. We'll bide our time. Well, they did bide their time, and now their time has come. But on the state level, I do think that his profile has been raised. I do know that there was a time, and as an outside observer before I came here, I was aware of who he was because he had a national reputation after getting elected in 2010. I knew coming in that he was not viewed by his fellow Republicans, at least in the establishment, as being a guy who played well with them. But I think they've had to stop and take a look back and see the public mood is changing and see how powerful he has become within his own district. I don't think anyone could take him out in a primary, ever, at this point. And he's young enough, he could hold this seat for the next 30, 35 years. And I think that has a huge part of what's going on. On the other hand, because he does tend to be, he's not beholden to certain special interests, and that would be big donors. And most of the Republican Party is beholden to what Rush Limbaugh calls the donor class. I don't think they want him in a role as governor in this state for that very reason, because he might actually listen to the little guy a little bit more often. And I'm not saying that the others don't. But I'm going to tell you something right now. If it comes down to we had a vote a few months ago on a Pacific Trade Agreement, and there are a lot of people who think that it surrenders American sovereignty. And yet we had the two members of our U.S. Senate, two members, Mr. Crapo and Mr. Risch, backing that. Why did they back it? Well, because the big donors wanted them to back it. Didn't really, they would listen to voters and nod their heads and say, I hear your concern. But let's be honest about this. They're worried about getting reelected, and in order to do that, they need a lot of money so they can buy a lot of advertising, so they can paint their opponent as being a dullard, a dimwit, or evil or corrupt, and you do that by blanketing the airwaves with advertising. But you got to pay for that. And the little guy doesn't, he can come along and hand you $5, but when you get into a really serious election, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that will need to be spent on advertising, even in a state with a small population like Idaho, they don't have any choice. Labrador seems to have been able to bypass that just because of his stand on a lot of issues. Now, that may change at some point, but he got by with a lot of small-time donors because he was in a district that could well be said to be rural. That's the other issue with all of this. Idaho is such a distinct state with so many different media markets because it's all spread out, and if you look at it on a map, you've got that great big long panhandle. So you've got to buy advertising not only in Twin Falls, you got to buy it in Nampa, you've got to buy it in Boise, Pocatello, Idaho Falls. You got to buy it in Spokane because you've got to reach people in Coeur d'Alene. And so this is the challenge for most people in politics who are living in a state that's so vast but with such scattered population centers. But I do think that Labrador, if he ends up as majority leader, it will definitely change his relationship to a lot of other Republicans in the state. And as I said, I have been hearing, especially directly from the governor's office, that the relationship has been getting better. Well, this will cement that, because if Idaho wants anything out of Congress now, and if your guy is the number 2 guy, not bad. There's a project or something, or you need something addressed, he'll make darn sure it gets addressed, whether he's the majority whip or the majority leader. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Funny how he'll get a lot of friends when that happens, because it's like, gee, you can do a lot for me right now. It's a bit like being a radio announcer. As a friend of mine once said, he'd been let go from a talk show that he was hosting. This is 20 years ago. And he said to me, I had a lot of friends when I was on the air, but he said, it's amazing how they all vanished. And he put it this way, he said, when you can no longer confer radio access to them, they tend to forget you. So it's all about what you can do for the next guy. Politics very much that way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 53. Lots of sunshine today, and that means that we're looking for a beautiful day ahead. It'll be a little cloudy on Friday. Well, okay, mostly cloudy Friday, but no real serious threat of rain or anything in the forecast for days on days on days. So a lot of sunshine ahead, and we've been recommending people, if you're looking to control the effects of the sun, which is a great bleaching agent, that you call Tint Lady of Idaho. And they'll come by and they'll do a free estimate, not only for your home, but for your business, your automobile. They'll do paint protection as well. That's because the sun beating through your windows, and if you have a lot of them, and if you live in this part of the country and you have so much sunshine, you do want to see it. I mean, obviously, you want a lot of windows in the house for that reason. The tint, though, can cut down on that bleaching effect. That's the key there. So you'll still get the sunlight, but this way you can protect your furniture, your carpet, your drapes, even your photographs you may have hanging on a wall. Some of those old sepia tone photographs my older relatives used to have hanging up, likely they got that color more from sun damage than they may have anything else. So it's a free estimate, as we've mentioned. You can call and schedule an appointment. The number is 736-8469, or go online, tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated, they've been in business for nearly a quarter century now. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Hours Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Closed Sundays, but you can get an appointment on Saturday if you call in advance and set that up. And remember, don't squint, get tint. Happened to see a story today that I find very alarming coming out of one of our neighboring states. But I think it shows you the march of liberalism through the Mountain West. And while they may be small in numbers, you understand how they can have a huge impact or influence. And I want you to think for a moment about what's going on. Think for a moment about what's going on with our own issues with refugee resettlement here in the Magic Valley, where you've got people, you've got the mainstream media, which is controlled by fellow traveling liberals. These are all people who think that the world would be better off if we had one world government and everybody was doled out, sandpaper or emery cloth for toilet paper, and you had to wait in 2-hour lines like they did in the old Soviet Union. But it's not just happening in Idaho. It's happening in Utah as well. This comes from the Daily Caller. Grade school choir banned from singing patriotic songs at Utah Freedom Festival. School district officials in a small town have canceled the plan to send a fifth-grade choir to sing patriotic songs at the festival because some local parents, the writer says, oppose the politics of the event and its organizers. The one-day gathering, now bereft of a fifth-grade choir, is the Western Freedom Festival in Cedar City. Iron County Commissioner David Miller, one of the organizers of the festival, suggested that the school district wants to remain steadfastly apolitical. So they can't go there and sing, My Country 'Tis of Thee. They can't go there, apparently, and when I see this sort of stuff, I don't, where do you start? You even take a song, when we were kids and we used to sing patriotic songs, we would sing This Land Is Your Land. It was written by a communist by the name of Woody Guthrie. When he wrote it, he was a columnist for the Daily Worker, the Communist Party mouthpiece in America. And they don't even want that? They can't go sing these types of songs? They can't sing, God Bless America? Well, it mentions God, I suppose, but why would they have, and it's some, when it says some, you know what it is. It's a couple of those guys with their little round glasses, and they're driving around in their Range Rover or their Land Rover, and what they're trying to do is tell everyone else how they have to live. Oh, we've got to stop the pollution of the planet. But my Range Rover doesn't count. That's what you're dealing with. The reason is the Western Freedom Festival, which is coming up on October 23rd on the campus of Southern Utah University. It will feature a conference with several speakers and a performance by Daryl Worley, a country music singer. Topics to be discussed at the conference will be federalism and attempts to transfer ownership of public lands from the federal government to the Utah state government. In other words, much of Utah is like much of Idaho. It's being held hostage by the federal government. 2/3 in this state, pretty much the same in Utah. So they're having a conference to discuss how you could transfer that land from the federal government to local people versus some bureaucrat 2,300 miles away in Washington. And yet, some of these liberals, these granola-chomping, hemp-clothing-wearing, Land Rover-driving liberals, have decided we cannot send our children to this conference because we would sanction that. Because why? They don't believe in local control. They want centralized control. They want Big Brother dictating every aspect of your life. 926, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 54. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, a couple points. Have you ever heard that beautiful rendition of This Land Is Your Land by Bernie Sanders? You ought to play it for us.
I have heard that. Bernie is such a bad singer. After 9/11, you had members of the House and Senate that came outside the Capitol and they sang God Bless America. And I kept hearing some people singing out of key. And I was living in Vermont at the time, so I called Bernie's office and I said, was that him? And they didn't take to that too kindly.
I tell you, it is a laugh. This deal with the immigration or the refugees in Twin and the governor manipulating things. And I've known Butch Otter for quite a few years, and I don't know him that well. If I was to walk up to him, he wouldn't say, hey, man, how are you? He wouldn't know. I mean, he would say that because that's how he is, but I don't know that he knows me that well. But you say to yourself, you'd like to think that these people care about Idaho the way we do. But when there's this political manipulation, party posturing, and it's even happening with the refugees in Twin, and, you think that these people really care about what's right. I'm telling you, it's scary. And none of these suckers seem to want to do the right thing. They've all got some ulterior motive And the only way we're going to tune them up is to make sure they know we're watching.
Well, wait a second. Hold on a minute. There was a movie out when I was a kid called Monty Python Search for the Holy Grail. And there's a scene where these knights who say something called knee, which is supposedly intimidates people, they demand that the knights go get them, the other knights, that is King Arthur and his court, shrubberies to decorate their lawn. So I know it's far-fetched and all that, but they go to get the shrubbery, and they're giving this old woman a hard time who's not cooperative. And a man rides up, and he argues with them about the way they're treating this woman. And then they say, well, who are you? And the guy says, I'm Jethro, the shrubber. And all of a sudden, one of the knights leaps forward and says, knee. In other words, to give him a hard time. Well, they need him. Last week, the governor said here on the air that he supported a moratorium on refugee resettlement. And I've been telling people, they don't think it goes far enough. Why, when occasionally one of these guys actually says, all right, I'll back this, why do we keep slapping them? Why don't we say, well, good work, keep it up?
I know. I just, like I say, and you just want somebody to care more about the country than they do about something else that isn't as important. We just don't have time to play this game anymore, I don't believe.
We don't, but, the political class, they've got big homes. They've got good work at lobbying firms after they leave that. I think that they're not really concerned. They got theirs, and in the long run, that's pretty much all it comes down to, right?
Well, think of it this way. I have a big family and lots of children and, whatever. And some of my children are doing better than others. Now, you see, are we to just let the others just drift because they're not cutting it for whatever the reason, and the ones that are doing well will go ahead and I'll be their friend, their father, this conditional BS.
Well, I got to let you go on that note because we have a hard break coming up, but I get the point. I get the drift. But then the governor's not related to us. So that cuts that tie right away.